Hello. In this video, we're going to go over how to develop integrations using the Salesforce Stripe API handler. So for this, we'll just be using Visual Studio as well as Postman to show some examples of how to build out those integrations. So I'll start by opening up Visual Studios and just creating a new project here. Now we'll just create a standard project and we'll just call this. Give it a simple name and we'll pick a location to save this. I'll just save it to my desktop. And in this example, all I'm going to do is build a very simple Lightning web component to communicate with the Stripe API, and then just basically console log out the return. Once I console log out the return, that'll show you the integration and how we pulled the data in. So to start with, I'll create a Lightning web component here. And again, I'll just give it a very simple name, and I want to keep the default directory. Okay, so to start with, we'll start with the HTML code. And in the HTML code, I'm just going to start with a simple article. And then inside of that article, I'm going to place maybe a quick little sentence and a button. Okay, now that I've pasted this code in, you can see basically all we're doing is we're creating a simple little card here, and inside that card I'm saying this is my log button, and then we're placing a log button here. I've named it checkout, and I have it calling my function just as an example for calling the Stripe API. Once we have this snippet in here, we can simply click save, because now we're done with the HTML piece of this. The next piece to look at is the JavaScript components. For JavaScript, all we have to do is we have to import the make API call from the Stripe API handler. To do that, we simply do an import. And now that we have this piece imported, we've brought in the piece of the API handler that allows us to make the API calls. The next piece here is in our export section of our class for the example demo. We're just going to add a function for that button to call. And from the HTML code, we can see that the function it's looking to call, we just named simply my function. So in the JavaScript, we're just going to create a new function piece here like that. Now here's where we get into, we can almost use Postman exclusively to copy and paste code in if we wanted to make this call. If we have the Stripe pieces loaded into Postman, we can navigate to any section we want. So maybe in this example, what we're going to do is, let's print out all customers, right? So maybe we simply say we want to get all customers, and we can see any parameters that we want to pass in. I would say the only thing we're going to pass in here is a limit, and let's say we're going to limit this to 5, just for our example here, so we can actually see how we pass in parameters. From here, simply click on the source code button, and then it'll actually show us the source code. And what I mean by copy and paste out is a lot of this backend is accepting URL parameters. You can see we don't really have any URL parameters here because it's just a get. But the way we can do this is we simply say, we set a couple variables here, and what we'll do is from Postman, we'll say, okay, we know we need to make a get. So we'll say var method equals get var. And then for the URL, all we're going to do again is we know we're getting this. Now we could try and copy and paste it from here. We can see the base URL, but in the actual call, we can see the URL being called right here in the fetch. So what we're going to do is just grab all of this. And just paste this in like so. And then the other argument that the call that we're going to make, this make it call out requires, is URL encoded parameters. Now, the Postman doesn't have any of those, so all we have to do here is say we're not actually going to pass that in, but these are essentially the three arguments that this make it call out accepts. So then we're going to actually make this call. And we know we need to pass this in. The first thing we're going to do is, these are named variables. So we're going to say URL. And here we're going to say null because we're not actually passing any, or I'm sorry, for the URL parameters, we're actually going to pass null. And the name of that variable is URL encoded. And we're just going to say null here. And then we're going to put a comma. We're going to say URL. We're going to say the URL equals the URL. And then last is method. And we're going to say method here as well. So these are the three arguments that this accepts. Now, this is a promise. So since it's a promise, we have to use a let here if we're going to set a variable for the return. So now that we have this, we can see we're getting an error on this await. That's because this function isn't async. Once we declare this function asynchronous, then the await error goes away. So we need to make sure we do that. Now that we have a return, we're just going to simply say console.log is our return. And essentially what this will allow us to do is basically print this return back into the console of the browser. Very simple. Again, all we're doing here is fetching 5 customers at random from, from the API, but it's kind of showing how easy this is to develop on, and then we'll get into a more complicated use case next. So what I'm going to do here is say file save. And I'm actually going to go ahead and say, oh, I need to set my my org. Give me 1 second here. All right, now that my org is set, I'm going to go ahead and deploy this. And one thing I forgot to do is set the XML metadata so it'll actually be visible to actually add to an app. So to do that, we're just going to open up the XML. I have an example I'm going to paste this example in. Basically what I'm saying is I want to expose it to these certain apps. That way I can add the Lightning Web Component to this. So again, I'm just going to say file save and do one more deployment here. All right, now that that's deployed, let's actually open up our Salesforce org. All right, now that we're in our Salesforce org, let's create a Lightning component here. And we'll go to Lightning App Builder. And we'll just create anything here. And again, we'll just use our example demo one. Here you can pick how you want it to look. In this example, I'm just going to say a single region and say finish. And then once this loads, all we have to do is grab our example demo piece from here and drag it in. Once we drag that in, we can see this is my log button. You can see I named it checkout when we were working on it. So we'll just simply say save. And we'll go ahead and say activate. Why not? Since this is just my test environment, I'll give it a simple logo. Why not a trophy? Let's say save here and finish. Then all we have to do is go back to our Salesforce piece here, and we're actually going to pull up this app. And we know we called it example demo. And now we can see that it's loaded this simple little thing here with the checkout. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up developer tools just so we can see the log. So now we have the console open. We're going to go ahead and click checkout. And we can see it simply pasted in the 5 customers, right? So we did a limit of 5. It grabbed 5 random customers and pasted them in here, and you can see all the customers came through. So very simple integration. Now let's do something a little bit more complex. So let's go back into our Visual Studio Code here, and we'll go back into the JS. Now, I would say, okay, that worked great. Now we had that function. Let's create a brand new function. So to start with, we'll just copy and paste this. I don't know. I'm not very good at coming up with creative names, so we'll just say my function 2 here. That way we know which one we're calling. And on this one, I'm going to go back to Postman. And again, I'm going to use that copy and paste approach to kind of writing this code, but I'm going to do something much more complex. Let's actually create a customer. So let's go down here to customers. We'll go into post where it says create a customer. We can see that we have different body arguments that we can make. In this example, I'm going to pass in an email address, and we'll say this is we'll give it something like that. And then let's find name in this list. We'll actually give the customer a name as well. And now we'll just call it our example. So again, we're making this very simple, and maybe a phone number. Why not? We'll do one of those great 555, 555, and 5555. Why not? I'll remove these dashes. There we go. Okay, so now we have 3 arguments that we're passing in. Again, these are hard-coded. In real world, we'd probably want to replace these with variables, but we can actually come in here and, again, using the JavaScript fetch command, this will build out almost all the arguments for us. So what I'm going to start by doing is grabbing this URL encoded, and you can see I actually don't even have to change any code for this. I can just copy and paste this from Postman directly into my example. So I'm going to replace from here down with what was sent. Let's format this just so it looks a little bit better. Oops. Okay, so now we know we have the URL encoded parameters, and again, I can see those here if we're setting those. Now, we could set those outside of the function, inside this, using vars, for example, making them global inside of that, or we could pass them in from the HTML into this using attributes or something like that, right? But there'd be ways to set these if we wanted to, or we could maybe we're getting something from the API and passing them in. All sorts of ways we could actually do that, but in this example, we're just going to hard set them. All right, so now that we have the URL encoded parameters, let's actually get the URL and the method that we're using. So again, we can just open up Postman. We can see that the method is a post. We'll just copy that. We'll paste that here. And then we need the URL. So we'll go back in the Postman. We're looking. So under fetch, we can see the URL that's being used. And we'll just go ahead and copy and paste that out as well. Now that we've pasted that in, we have the call built. The one thing that we don't want to forget is right here we have URL encode set to null. We're actually going to set that to URL encoded. And we're going to say, hey, URL encoded equals this variable URL encoded. And we're going to go ahead and say file. And we're going to save this. Then we're going to go into our HTML, and instead of calling my function with a button click, we're going to go ahead and say my function 2. So basically we're just saying, hey, on button click, call this other example. This file save. Now we saved that. The one other thing that I know we made a mistake on is we can't pass this object in like this. It actually has to be a string. So what we need to do is actually pass in toString. If we don't do that, we're going to get some kind of error on the URL encode we pass in. It won't actually be able to handle it. So we need to actually make that a string. We'll go ahead and save this and deploy as well. Apologies for missing that. Now that that's being deployed, we'll go ahead and go back into Salesforce. And we'll do a hard refresh here. And we'll click checkout. Now you can see a single customer returned here. And if we actually open up our Salesforce piece, or excuse me, our dashboard inside of Stripe, we can go into customers and we'll actually see, we got to put it in test mode. We'll actually see the customer we added. Remember, we named it our test example, and here it is here. It even has the name. Again, it should only have a phone number, and it should only have, you can see the phone number we passed in, and it only has an email address and a name. Right. So again, we only passed in 3 attributes, but we can see how easy it was to actually create a call to do that.